No, I don't.
By the way, everyday FBI agents who are assigned in Washington don't get to fly home on a private jet.
Well, this is a great point. Do you know why I have to use a private jet? Because Congress made it mandatory. Well, that's not accurate. Depending on where you're stationed, the FBI covers the bill to get home.
Well, we didn't make it mandatory that you go to UFC games with Mel Gibson.
Are you telling me I can't go home?
You got to use some judgment here.
So when I'm at home, I can't do what I'm doing when I go home. Everybody else is allowed to go home,
just not me. Let me keep going. No, I'm glad you go home. I love to go home.
Kash Patel built part of his public image by accusing FBI leadership of waste, privilege, and a culture that operated above accountability. So when Senator Peter Welch confronted him over FBI flights tied to UFC events and hockey appearances, this was never just about travel. It was about whether power changed the standard. Patel's defense was immediate. As FBI director, he says he is required to use secure government aircraft. And on one narrow point, that is true. Executive branch policy has long treated the FBI director as a required use traveler because of security and secure communications needs. But Welch's point was different and much more politically dangerous. The rule may explain the plane, yet it does not automatically justify every destination. That is where this story turns from bureaucracy into a question of judgment, optics, and credibility.
On the weekend of, according to flight tracker data, on the weekend of March 7th, an FBI plane flew round trip from D.C. to Las Vegas, and you attended a UFC fight with Mel Gibson. And I'll show you that. Is that you, and is that true?
Yeah, you want to know the difference? I live in Las Vegas. I'm allowed to go home. I didn't leave a congressional hearing early on an FBI jet to dodge questions.
All right. Then on April 5th, you attended a hockey game in New York City. You don't live there, right?
No, I don't.
By the way, everyday FBI agents who are assigned in Washington don't get to fly home on a private jet.
Well, this is a great point. Do you know why I have to use a private jet? Because Congress made it mandatory.
Okay. In April 5th, well, we didn't make it mandatory that you go to UFC games with Mel Gibson.
Are you telling me I can't go home?
You got to use some judgment here.
So when I'm at home, I can't do what I'm doing when I go home. Everybody else is allowed to go home, just not me.
Let me keep going. No, I'm glad you go home. I love to go home. But I don't go home on a private jet. On April 5th,
they're not mandated to do so.
You attended a hockey game in New York City with Wayne Gretzky. And Flight Tracker says the FBI jet took you to and from New York City, where you don't live, right?
That's correct.
And on April 12th, on the following weekend, you attended a UFC fight in Miami, also on the FBI jet, right?
That's correct.
So what's the cost to the taxpayer for those 3 flights?
Well, I pay the commercial equivalent per the regs and the law. And so just so you know, when you are comparing me to prior directors...
I asked what the cost was, and you don't know.
What makes this exchange powerful is that Welch isn't arguing over some obscure regulation buried in a federal handbook. He's arguing over common sense. If the FBI director must use government aircraft for security, fine. But when that aircraft shows up around celebrity-heavy UFC nights, hockey appearances, and weekend travel, the public naturally asks a second question. Were these operational necessities, or the perks of high office dressed up as official movement? Patel answered with the language of entitlement and legality. Welch answered with the language of optics and fairness. And in Washington, that difference matters. Because scandals are not always born from what is strictly forbidden. Sometimes they grow from the gap between what a leader once condemned and what that same leader later defends once the privileges belong to him. Las Vegas is where Patel's defense begins to wobble. He told Welch he lives there, and therefore he was allowed to go home. That argument is politically clever because it shifts the story from indulgence to residence. But the criticism does not disappear. It simply changes shape. If the director is returning home under required use travel rules, the public still wants to know how often, under what circumstances, and at what real cost to government resources. And when one of those weekends intersects with a UFC event and celebrity company, that is where a personal explanation starts colliding with a public duty image. The issue is not that Patel was seen in public. The issue is that he once made this exact style of travel a symbol of official excess. That symbolism is now aimed back at him.
FBI Director Kash Patel and his government jet landed in a unique location today, Italy. Sources tell CBS News that while there, the director plans to attend the 2026 Winter Olympics for the U.S. men's semifinals and finals games tomorrow. So keep in mind, Director Patel's use of this jet has come under intense scrutiny as of late. CBS News reviewed public flight data that showed the director took off on his official plane this morning and landed at an Air Force base in Italy. So I want to bring in Sarah Lynch, the senior Justice Department reporter for CBS News. So Sarah, what does the FBI say Patel's visit is for?
Well, the FBI spokesman said that if this is not a trip for personal use, this is a business trip. He has many different meetings that were previously scheduled. He has meetings with counterparts, law enforcement counterparts in Italy that he was invited to months ago. He's meeting with the ambassador. He also said that there's another meeting with the U.S. consulate because the FBI has a role in the security at the Olympics and that these were previously scheduled. But after he tweeted that, the spokesman also put out a tweet adding that Kash Patel spoke with him and told CBS that, yes, he's going to the games. Go Team USA.
All right, Sarah Lynch. Sarah, thank you.
By this point in the video, the audience should understand something important. This is not a story about whether Patel ever had a legal basis to board the plane. It is a story about pattern, optics, and accountability. Reuters reported that public flight data showed FBI aircraft trips linked to Las Vegas, New York, and Nashville, while CBS reported additional scrutiny over travel tied to sports and personal destinations. Patel's defenders can argue that official business sometimes overlaps with personal time, and that reimbursement rules address that. His critics can counter that the pattern still signals a leadership style increasingly comfortable with the trappings of office. Both can be true at once. But politically, the hardest thing for Patel to escape is not the aircraft log. It is the memory of his own words. He taught critics how to frame this story long before he ever had to answer for it.
FBI Director Kash Patel has shamelessly exploited the FBI's private government jet to support his jet-setting lifestyle, including a golf getaway in Scotland and a trip to watch his girlfriend perform a wrestling match. Most recently, he flew to Italy to chug beers with the U.S. Olympic hockey team. As a whistleblower told the committee, the tone was set early in Director Patel's tenure when he told FBI agents, quote, "If you have golf, hockey, fishing, or hunting and beautiful sights, you're going to see an awful lot of me."
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And just at the outset, I just want to say what I think all of us believe, and that is that the political violence that is so afflicting our country, it doesn't matter whether it's from the right or the left. I mean, all of us have an obligation to fiercely advocate for our point of view. All of us have an obligation to respect people with whom we disagree. The folks we disagree with are our opponents, but they're not our enemies. And I hope all of us keep that in mind and do the best we can to set that example. I want to congratulate the FBI. I want to congratulate the Utah state and local law enforcement for the very good work that it did in apprehending the violent assailant of Charlie Kirk, and that is a terrible, terrible tragedy. Director Patel, at one point you made an announcement that the suspect was in custody. We got our man. It turned out that was not true. In fact, I think that was about 27 hours before the person now in custody was apprehended. Why did you make that statement?
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate you letting me address this. What the FBI does is not just locate and find suspects, but we also participate in eliminating subjects. And what we had at the time was a subject in custody in relation to this investigation. So in my commitment to work with the public to help identify subjects and suspects, I put that information out. And then when we interviewed him, I put out the results of that. And could I have been more careful in my verbiage and included an A subject instead of subject? Sure, in the heat of the moment, but I was doing the best I
without,
could.
in all candor, I don't quite get that, because if we have our man, that would suggest to the public that everybody can rest and relax and not then continue to provide information to local law enforcement and to you.
Well-
So that was a mistake.
I don't see it as a mistake. I see it as something working with the public to identify that there was a subject
So if
in
you
custody.
put out a statement that says we've got our man, and in fact it turns out that you didn't have your man, that's not a mistake?
But that's not what I said.
Well, I'll go on. That's my understanding. A second thing that is really important in the FBI, but it's important in every agency, is that the folks who are doing good work get supported for the work they're doing. And a number of highly successful FBI agents have been let go. And I want to just ask you a little bit about that. You know who Brian Driscoll is, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And my understanding is he served at the FBI for over 18 years. You agree?
I believe that's accurate.
Special agent in charge of the Newark office. He was commander of the FBI's hostage rescue team. That's a very prestigious and responsible position, correct?
It is.
Section chief of the Critical Incident Response Group's tactical section. You've got to be pretty good to get that high responsibility. You agree with that?
Yes, sir.
He oversaw 55 SWAT teams, and they're like the elite of the elite, right? They go in to the dangerous situations, right? He got a Medal of Valor for his participation in a raid on ISIS terrorist Abu Sayyaf, who had kidnapped American citizens Kyla Mueller, right? Mueller? Is that right?
I know.
You're in agreement, right?
I know Kayla Mueller's family, yes. I know the situation.
Okay, and he got Kurt Meyer, somebody who had barricaded himself in a bar after he killed 4 people and wounded 2. And Driscoll was part of the team that went in there and took that guy out, right?
I don't have all the details, but I'll take your word for it, Senator.
And he got into trouble when Emil Bove demanded a list of FBI agents who investigated January 6th and was apprehensive that what did happen ultimately would happen, and that is those folks would get fired. I mean, do you agree with me that a boss who stands up for his subordinates when they did the job that was asked of them is a stand-up person and somebody to be admired?
Generally speaking, yes, sir.
Pardon me?
Generally speaking, yes, sir.
But Driscoll got fired, right?
Again, that matter is under litigation, and the matter you referenced occurred before I was
Okay, but
director.
let's just keep it fairly narrow here. He's fired, right?
Yes, he was terminated.
And he has to be, there's somebody communicates to him that he's terminated, correct?
That's my job.
That's your job. So you communicated to him that he was fired.
I did.
So, I have a hard time with this because that record suggests to me that this person is like worthy of consideration for the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and he got fired.
But there's also a record of other information that was available, and now that this matter is pending litigation, we will get that out in due course. But as you can
the
agree,
so you've got, quote, other information that you see as a valid basis to fire somebody who, from what I can tell, had an absolutely outstanding record and who crossed the threshold of getting in trouble because he was standing up for agents serving under him who did work that was assigned to them that happened to be related to the January 6th uprising.
again, you're correlating based on your information the reasons for his termination, and I'm telling you.
No, that's right. Let me ask you another question. When you were here, you were rightly critical, not here actually, I guess it was on Cash's corner. You were rightly critical of the way that the previous FBI director used the FBI jet. And you said you wanted to ground Chris Wray's private jet travel that he pays for with taxpayer dollars to hop around the country. Let me ask you this. On the weekend of, according to flight tracker data, on the weekend of March 7th, an FBI plane flew round trip from D.C. to Las Vegas, and you attended a UFC fight with Mel Gibson. And I'll show you that. Is that you, and is that true?
Yeah, you want to know the difference? I live in Las Vegas. I'm allowed to go home. I didn't leave a congressional hearing early on an FBI jet to dodge questions.
All right. Then on April 5th, you attended a hockey game in New York City. You don't live there, right?
No, I don't.
By the way, everyday FBI agents who are assigned in Washington don't get to fly home on a private jet.
Well, this is a great point. Do you know why I have to use a private jet? Because Congress made it mandatory.
Okay. In April 5th, well, we didn't make it mandatory that you go to UFC games with Mel Gibson.
Are you telling me I can't go home?
You got to use some judgment here.
So when I'm at
Beth,
home,
you
I
would-
can't do what I'm doing when I go home. Everybody else
keep-
is allowed to go home,
Let
just
me
not
keep
me.
going. No, I'm glad you go home. I
Okay.
love to go home. But I don't go home on a private jet. On April 5th,
You're not mandated to do so.
You attended a hockey game in New York City with Wayne Gretzky. And Flight Tracker says the FBI jet took you to and from New York City, where you don't live, right?
That's correct.
And on April 12th, on the following weekend, you attended a UFC fight, a fight in Miami, also on the FBI jet, right?
That's correct.
So what's the cost to the taxpayer for those 3 flights?
But I pay the commercial equivalent per the regs and the law. And so just so you know, when you are comparing me
I
to
just
prior
asked what
directors.
I asked what the cost was, and you don't know, I take it.
Yeah, and what I've done with the use of the private jet is use Andrews Air Force Base versus
Okay.
Reagan National as what the other directors have done
Bottom line
to
here,
save the taxpayer
bottom
dollars.
line here, you flew home to Las Vegas. There's nobody else in the FBI who gets paid. They have to pay their own way if they want to go home, right? I mean, right?
Well, that's not accurate. Depending on where you're stationed, the FBI covers the bill to get home.
So are you telling me that FBI agents who are assigned in Washington, but who may live in Charlotte, they get paid by the FBI to go
Sometimes
home?
they do, yes.
Right. Another thing I want to say is this. Our local law enforcement has been stiffed. About $500 million in COP grants have been taken out of the budget. Those really help us in Burlington. They help us in Rutland. They really are important. And why in the world would we be cutting those COP grants when we need that local law enforcement, in part to partner with you?
Well, I
Do
think
you
you're
support that?
I think you're speaking to the Department of Justice grants, which I don't adjudicate, but also Vermont, just like every other state, has received a plus-up of FBI personnel.
Well, I'll tell you, that's not what we're seeing. The other thing, my understanding is that there's a requisition or an effort to get another plane for the FBI that would cost about $72 million. Is that right?
That's inaccurate. The FBI, because the jet, as you call it, is not my jet. We use it for operational needs. We use it for FTOX. We use it for HRT.
But that's the one you fly in,
and
right?
we have multiple fixed-wing assets, and one of them is on a wildly expensive lease that I deemed a waste of money, and I'm looking for a replacement in which the government can procure assets permanently.
Well, I would welcome you submitting to this committee the cost information about the jets that are under consideration. And according to our research, the specifications that are included in this request would result in an expenditure of between $72 million and $80 million.
That's inaccurate, but I'll happily get you the right
I
numbers.
welcome getting the specific information.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
This is the point where the story leaves symbolism and lands on accountability. Because once a public official cannot or will not answer the simplest numerical question, what did it cost? The debate shifts. It is no longer only about ethics or headlines or whether the optics look bad. It becomes about transparency. Patel's answer was to say he reimburses the commercial equivalent, which is the rule. But reimbursement is not the same thing as full public clarity. Taxpayers hear commercial equivalent and still wonder about crew time, aircraft availability, maintenance strain, scheduling disruption, and the opportunity cost of having high-value government assets tied up on travel that may blur official and personal lines. Former FBI officials quoted by CBS warned that routine personal use of such aircraft could take critical resources offline when they may be needed quickly. That warning gives the story real institutional weight. The most damaging scandals in Washington are often the ones a politician writes for himself in advance. Patel's problem is not merely that lawmakers and reporters are asking where he flew. It is that he spent years telling audiences exactly how to interpret government luxury, executive privilege, and taxpayer-funded travel. He chose the language. He set the moral standard. He made the jet a symbol of a corrupt culture. And now, as director, he is asking the public to separate his own travel from the exact pattern he once denounced in someone else. Maybe there are explanations for each trip. Maybe some of those explanations are legitimate. But the burden of proof is heavier when the accuser becomes the office holder. That is why this exchange matters. Not because a plane is the biggest crisis inside the FBI, but because hypocrisy is often the clearest window into how power changes people. In the end, Peter Welch landed the line that this entire controversy turns on. Congress may require the FBI director to fly securely, but Congress did not require him to show up at UFC fights with Mel Gibson or at hockey events in cities where he does not live. That is the unresolved issue Patel never really answered. This story is not a courtroom verdict. It is an accountability test. If Patel wants the public to believe his travel has been proper, then the cleanest response is simple. Publish the costs, explain the purpose of each disputed trip, and let the record speak for itself. Until then, the image that will stick is the one he created years ago, a man attacking government jet culture before inheriting the keys to the jet himself.